You are listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, happy Monday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And if you come on over to my YouTube channel, you can watch this broadcast in synchronicity, simultaneously, all together at the same time with the audio broadcast in video over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. It's my simulcast over on my YouTube channel. And by the way, that along with many other sources out there, you can find this show archived after every episode. If you go to my YouTube channel and just scroll down, you're going to find every episode we've done of the Intrepid radio program in video. And the best part about coming over to the YouTube channel is that you can also join the live chat room. So come on over, chat about this. You can listen along in Odyssey Radio, and you're going to find, I don't know if you'll be able to sync them all up perfectly, but there it is. So Odyssey Radio, ODYSY1.com, and youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Whew, that was a tough one this morning. Monday morning this week, it was tough for me. And it's been a long day of feeling detached from my brain. Do you ever have those days? You kind of turn around and you feel like, whew, I got nothing in my brain. I'm dizzy today. My brain is dizzy. My brain is not firing on all its thrusters, all its functions. And so this, what we're going to talk about tonight, really kind of deals with that. I wanted to step us back in to something we left off on a few weeks ago, talking about being conscious, being awake, being aware that you're awake, and being in the now. And so I want to ask you a question. What does it mean to be truly awake? We hear all this nonsensical talk out there, especially in politics and the world at large, about being woke. I'm woke, he's woke, and I've mentioned it several times before. Hate the term woke, because that's not really being awake. That is a pop cultural term that's been coined to say, boy, I've got good attention span, or wow, I'm really getting the deeper issues, when it really has nothing to do with being aware and being awake and being in the now. And so I want to ask you, what does it truly mean to be awake? I can think back a couple of decades ago when I first heard about the whole now ubiquitous onion theory. You ever heard of that? How much sense it made. For those who are not familiar with it, it's obvious as this. The self is like an onion, and the truest part lies deep in the center, and it's wrapped in layer upon layer of experience, attachment, distortion, sometimes willful distortion, and at the beginning of the process, our public persona is as rough as the outer peel. To get to the center, to uncover the image, and perhaps even a likeness of who we perceive God to be, well, you got to start peeling. You got to peel away those outer layers. Shrek even said it to Donkey. He says, Donkey, I'm like an onion. I'm layered. And so, as with an actual onion, expect to experience plenty of tears, overexposure, new sensitivities that are up to this point, you might find you've spent a lifetime or two covering up. And this whole idea of onion, of getting to the core of who you really are, and what the world around you is really all about, and what the universe, if you will, is all about. And I almost hate using terms like universe and things like that, because that gets so sing-songy and new agey, and it's almost like, you have to adapt a new age name, like, I am now, you shall know me as Chiming Bell Angel Scotty, or something stupid like that. That's not what this is all about. It's not about renaming yourself because you become aware that there's a broader universe out there. It's becoming aware that you where you are in the universe, your place, this moment in time, the now, and being awake to that. Let's get into this a little bit deeper, and so you'll see what I mean. There's many physicians who use the onion analogy to explain the healing process, as do mental health professionals, spiritual gurus, and it's apt as a metaphor as we're likely to find for the journey inward, this layer of onion layers that we encounter once you start digging. And that, I think, prevents people from digging. I know for guys, it prevents us from going too deep. I remember when I was in counseling, marital counseling with my ex-wife 25 years ago, and the counselor would ask me, "That's a great description of things, Scotty, but how do you feel? What's really going on inside?" And that would stump me because I didn't really know. I hadn't dug deep, and there was an aversion to getting too deep because it might break things open. I remember, if you're a Star Trek fan, you remember Spock when he was a child, and he was learning, and his mother asked him, "But how do you feel?" And he couldn't wrap his brain around that. And so it's a great metaphor, this whole onion thing. And so in order to find total well-being within ourselves, we have to be willing to engage in kind of what I would call a reverse process. It's the process of undoing all the negative things we've been doing, as well as the negative things that have been done to us. And I would add in there, seeking the positive things that have happened and the positive things that have made us who we are. This is the process of waking up and becoming conscious, and it's not an easy one. And I'll tell you, there's this whole nostalgia. Yesterday when we did It's Sunday over in the chat room, the YouTube chat room, and video, we talked about one of the tarot cards that came up was I want to say it was the Six of Cups. I'm trying to think if it's the Four of Cups or the Six of Cups. It's got the two children, and it's the card of nostalgia. It's the card that says it is all right to look at your memories and to learn from them, but not to allow those things to guide who you are. And by guide, I almost use that in a negative sense here. We allow our past experiences to govern and control who we are, rather than put them in their proper place as nostalgia, both the positive and the negative. We can draw from those experiences, but we have to live in the now. Those are things that happened that brought us to where we are, this now moment. So, although, inarguably, we all derive from the same source, each life's journey is as unique as our physical DNA. And some would add spiritual DNA. So, there's no way to trace spiritual DNA in the lab, but it's there. So, of course, the process of awakening, becoming aware, is equally unique for every person. Even if I'm experiencing the same illness as another person, or I had the same types of abuses, or the same types of wonderful experiences happen in my past, I am most likely not experiencing those things in the same way or for the same reasons as other people. And so even the consequences of that illness or that abuse or that baggage that we carry, it's something that's going to differ from one person to another. One person's layers can't be compared to another person's layers. Although we can say that we have similarities, the types of abuse, the types of negativities, the types of illnesses, the types of things, positive things that have happened to us, be they sexual abuse, be they physical abuse, be they fantastic parents, be they all these different things that make up who we are, these layers that create who we are. We always seem to kind of focus on the negative because those are the things that seem to stick with us and govern us and draw us off the path in our current, in our now. Even though the positive things are there, the negative always seems to glare brighter in our memories, in our consciousnesses. Those are the things that create the baggage that we have to carry. that load that we sometimes need to divest ourselves of in order to make it to our goals. But also, one person's layer can't be compared to another. Each layer on each onion is composed of different experiences, relationships, belief systems. This is why, on a spiritual level, judgment of other people is a meaningless waste of time. I've done it. I've judged other people. I've been judged by other people. But what a waste of time. Because how do we judge people? We judge people by our personal standards, by the things that we hold true to. Have you ever noticed, if you really step back for a second, how everybody else is not quite as good as we are individually? Because we judge everybody we experience by our standard. That means we're placing ourselves on a pedestal and saying the things that we are obviously the measure by which I should judge everybody else. It's a waste of time. It's empty and it's meaningless. So what may look to be one person's ill fate or even bad behavior may actually be an awakening for that person. The important clearing of another layer of the onion. So likewise, what may look to be an awakening in somebody else may be yet another deeper journey into self-deceit. So how do you tell the difference? How do you tell the difference in your life? How do I tell the difference in my life? We can tell the difference between someone's awakening, including our own, and someone's continued deepening hibernation by that person's willingness to seek and effect change. Now we say we can't change other people, but we can change ourselves. You know, that makes me think of something. Let me go over for a second to my Facebook page. I posted something a few days ago. Let me scroll down and see if I can even find this right now. And it was about the way that we approach things in our lives, the way that we move on from things and do things right. It was on it was a picture of a marker board and a quote that somebody had written. And I've got it in here somewhere. Just bear with me for a couple of seconds. Well, here it is. You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. This was written by C.S. Lewis, very famous for his Chronicles of Narnia books and his Screwtape Letters and books like that he's very well known for. And so these are the things that we have to look at. We have to tell the difference between the way we can tell the difference between if we are advancing, becoming awake, waking up, being aware, being in the now, and just feeding our self-delusion is really simple. It just involves the willingness to not just look within, but to take action. In other words, to bring ourselves into congruity with the truth, whatever that involves. And by the way, I have to say for a note here, and I've mentioned this before, I am not one of those who thinks truth is relative, that truth changes from person to person. I believe there are some absolutes, universal absolutes. There are truths out there. And there's simple things like, stupid example, if I cut off my oxygen, I will probably die. That's a truth that's out there. Now, where truth is in the eyes of the perceptor, the one who perceives it, is our truths in our experience and our different layers of the onion are different from person to person. The truth might be, I and everybody else out there has experienced baggage. That's a truth. How we react to that, what we do with it, is the truth to us personally. An example. Let's say you have a husband whose chronic behavior is borderline abusive. And I know a lot of women like this. One day, you suddenly get through to him. On this one day, you're able to shake him up enough to get his attention and declare the truth about how his unfair behavior affects you. And let's say this time, he's really listening to you. So in that moment, everything you say to him makes complete sense. A breakthrough. He swears it'll never happen again. And you believe him. And you're filled with hope. The first time he commits to this behavioral reform, you may be satisfied. But with each subsequent abusive experience, you're going to no doubt become more and more suspicious of his claims, his reform, because nothing really changes. And although he clearly acknowledges his abusive behavior, he is in effect seeking no real truth whatsoever, and therefore changing nothing within or without. So instead of bringing himself into congruity with what he knows to be true, he nevertheless chooses to remain imprisoned by the familiar discomfort and distortion that's created his abusive behavior in the first place. Your husband, or your wife, or your son, or your daughter, or your mother, or yourself may indeed see a momentary light somewhere along the way, and you've been blinded by it, and even wanted or tried to respond to it and make the changes, but then came the moment of choice. Awaken and face the light, or remain in the darkness. There's always a choice. Always a choice that needs to be made. Everything is a choice, and it's decisions we make. Rather than face the consequences of abusive actions and the tedious chore of reversing them, most people burrow even more deeply into the slumber of unconsciousness. And so the truth for these two people, let's say it's the husband and the wife, the husband has that momentary epiphany that, yes, I've been abusive and I need to make changes. But he doesn't really do it. He doesn't take that action internally. And then there is the wife, who says, now, by the way, exchange the roles. You can flip-flop those roles to anybody. But the wife in this example, one who stays in the abuse, rather than saying, now that I've made him see the abuse, I would like to make this happen and work and be real. But when they see it doesn't, they keep going back. They keep staying. They remain. These are people that are trapped in self-deceit and not being awake. I'm not advocating separation and divorce. I'm advocating, in those types of situations, that you have to work at it, but you need to have two people that are willing to look at themselves, willing to make adjustments, willing to incorporate action to change something. That is an awake person. That is somebody who's aware. That's somebody who is living in the now. And now, you might not be an abuser, or you might not have abuse in your life, but we all, as people, have things that we can look at and say, these are things that have made me, that have formed who I am. It's deep down at the core, and I've got all these layers on top. You got to strip away the layers and say, I need to face truths in my life to make the appropriate adjustments. That is the beginning of being aware. That's the beginning of being awake. Because awake isn't just an acknowledged thing. Okay, yep, I'm awake. Here we go. Now I got to go to work. No, it's taking action. It's looking deeper. It's peeling away the rotted external layer of self-deceit. An awake person knows that the power to change themselves, and therefore the world, is a real miracle. If not the entire purpose of our material existence. Who knows what the purpose of our material existence is? I ask that even now, even when I was deeply entrenched in religious belief of, call it, when I was in the Baptist church. We're going to call that the literalist, orthodox, religious methodology. I realized what it was, but we covered everything with, my only purpose for living is to emulate Christ. Is to be an ambassador for Christ on the earth, and to look forward to our home in heaven. And that's all we had, and that's all we did. But it didn't break down into the core of things. It was, I believe, a superficial thing that we wrap ourselves in sometimes as religion. And so the miracle, the real miracle, is getting to the core of who you are and the purpose, the real purpose of you. And it's not enough to simply notice something within ourselves or outside of us and do nothing. What's the old quote that comes to mind just by saying the words "do nothing"? Edmund Burke once said. I got to remember how this quote goes. Something about the evil. Why, when I want the quote in my head, does it not come? Edmund Burke. You can look him up. You know this quote. You've heard it a million times. I got to look it up right now, because I'm talking so much, I'm talking over the quote in my memory. It's something where he said, "Oh, for Pete's sake, I gotta find it now." Edmund Burke quotes. Let's look that up. I think it's important to get the actual quote here. "The only thing necessary," he said, "for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." He went on and he said, "When bad men combine, the good must dissociate, else they fall one by one, an unpitied sacrifice in a contemptible struggle. And people will not look forward to posterity who never look backward to their ancestors." So the one quote I was after is, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing." So this opportunity, more than anything else, is what distinguishes us from other living things on this planet. The power to acknowledge, to transform, and to transcend. Now, does a raccoon have his pains from his youth, being beaten too many times by his dad, or, another raccoon stealing his food? Maybe. Instinct. He learns. He adapts. But does he have conscious awareness of that and how it has changed him? We humans are unique in the sense that we have that. And to change is what we have that's unique. It's what we are. It's what we're called upon to do for our own sake and for the sake of everyone else we encounter, because we're all one thing. And to awaken means to acknowledge our spiritual nature, to observe our behavior, and to bring ourselves into alignment with the truth. And you say, what's truth? You know the truth when you hit on it. This is a process that's involved, and a process that's involved in making ourselves aware. It's conversions. It's painful confrontations with our past. It's hard work, to be sure. It's been hard work for me. It's hard work for everybody. I still work on it. But in the end, nothing could be more valuable or more worthwhile. By doing our life's work, we're making the best use of this very brief period of empowered, sentient existence to advance the consciousness of ourselves and consequently of all mankind. Now, maybe that sounds a little new agey for you, so bring it in personal. We are responsible for who we are. We can fall back on the past pains and the past shit that's happened to us and say, oh, poor me. That's the crafting our own blindfold and tying it on and then complaining that we can't see anything. The idea is to open yourself up to yourself and do the work. Maybe you don't have deep pains in your past, and that's okay. That's great. But still, digging to the core of who you are makes you aware and awake and conscious and living in the now. Folks, we got to go out to break. We're going to talk about some more of this when we come back. Sit tight. All right, folks, we're back. Thanks for sitting there and waiting through the break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to this program either on the Odyssey Radio Network, ODYSY1.com, or one of its affiliates, or one of the terrestrial stations that carry the show, or you are over watching the simulcast in video on my YouTube channel, Mr. Scotty Roberts. And if you're not there, come on over and join the chat room. You can throw your 2 cents in. You can join the family of Intrepid listeners, and you can learn a lot of stuff from a lot of people out there. So let's get back into this. We're talking about being awake. How do you know you're being awake? Or how do you know you're awake? How do you know you're there? It's when you see yourself as that metaphoric onion that's full of layers, and you've started peeling back the layers to see what you're made of. And at the core, you will find the things that you either need to resolve or build on to create truth, to be attached with the truth. And there's 3 struggles that only truly awake people will understand. Now, listen to this closely and ask yourself, if you feel any of these struggles, you're going to understand this if you're awake. And so, one topic I read about in my personal life a lot is the concept of being awake. I'm not talking about literally not being asleep. I'm talking about being awake to the world around you. And this is what we started talking about. And when you've got that concept, that metaphoric concept in mind of I'm like an onion, I've got layers, and you can start sorting things out. And I'm not saying that this has got to be a woe is me thing. Oh, I have pains that are so deep, and I must get to the core. No, it's getting to the core of your true self, of who you are, and finding out what makes you tick, and finding out how to be in the moment. Wakefulness is a combination of mindfulness, conscientiousness, or consciousness, and awareness on a very deep and most often, a spiritual level. Imagine walking around with your eyes open in a world full of people with their eyes clenched shut. Imagine walking around with your eyes open when everybody else's are closed. That's honestly what it feels like. Now, I'm not talking about judging other people. I'm talking about noticing that, why do I have my eyes open to this stuff and nobody else around me seems to? You look at the things that pull them away, the things that create distance and division and problems. And you many times can get to the core of it. That's honestly what it feels like. And the more I study and meditate and really search my own soul, the more I realize that this mentality isn't the norm, no matter how much I wish it was. I'm not bragging. I'm not saying I've attained anything. I'm just saying the more I look inward, the more I find out a lot of people don't. And if you're like me and you consider yourself to be awake in a world that's full of people with their blinders securely tightened to their heads, then you'll understand these following struggles just as much as I do. All right, here they are. If you're awake, you're going to notice these struggles out there and people around you. Seeing the forest through the trees. How many times have we used that little catchphrase for something? Of all the aspects of wakefulness that I struggle with, this notion is number one on my list. And the entire reason for me talking about this at all. You've heard the cliche of people missing the forest through the trees, or you can't see beyond the nose on your face and things like that. It means that when you look so intently at that one tree, you don't notice that you're surrounded by them. They're all around you. You're in a deep forest, and you're focusing on one tree. Can't see the forest for the tree. And if you're truly awake, or at least well on your way to being awake, you see the forest from an aerial view. I once saw a post about somebody, an artist, who was making posters for the national park system, using this kind of negative ad approach, but kind of tongue in cheek. They went and they found the negative comments, like on Yelp or other sources, about national parks that people have posted up, like, oh, too many bears, or something like that. It's scary out there in the woods, and this person made ad campaigns out of them. And one of them was, there's so many trees I can't see the landscape. Can you imagine that being a complaint about being out in nature and in a national forest? Or the view is kind of dull because it's only gray rocks and mountains and a calm reflective lake. So this is not seeing the forest through the trees. And when you look so intently at one tree, you don't notice what's surrounding it. And intuition has a lot to do with it, but studying psychology, spirituality, and the human mind has given me and others this kind of different perspective. And again, I'm not saying I've attained it. I've said by looking at these things, it's kind of opened my eyes a little bit. I've always wanted to know what makes people tick outside of the actual physiological components. That's why I talk a lot about this stuff. That's why I've written about this stuff. Emotional intelligence. Because I think it's the first step in being awake. If you consider yourself to be emotionally intelligent, then you understand how so many people are emotionally ignorant. And this is where the forest and the trees come in. As someone who is awake, you see the actions of people and you understand why they do them. For me, it's seeing the underlying reasons for people's actions. A perfect example. I have a friend, probably more than one friend, but I'm thinking of one person in particular, and it's none of you. Don't worry about it. This person's passively aggressive to a fault. Passive aggressive, meaning I can't even think of an example off the top of my head. You know what passive aggressiveness is? It's where you do something without outrightly confronting a person, but you do something passively to let them know how displeased you are with them. And it doesn't really get to the core. It doesn't solve the problem. It just shows your angstiness about what they're doing. But when this person gets behind the wheel of a car, he turns into a road rage machine. Nothing, not because of the people around him are really driving badly, but because there's this well of mental glass around him that prevents others from hearing him express himself. All of those frustrations that get bottled up throughout the day get unleashed as a torrent of ranting and cursing that would make a sailor blush. And for what? Nothing really. Doesn't solve any of the issues that have been bottled up. I mean, folks, I've had my own moments of road rage. Now, I wouldn't say it's blind rage. I haven't pulled my car in front of somebody else and got out and bashed their windshield in with a baseball bat or anything like that. That's actually violent aggression. It's not passive. But I've yelled at people, you dumbass, or whatever. It can get a lot more foul than that sometimes. They don't even know I'm saying anything. So who's it helping? No one. I'm just releasing what my aggressions are passively. And hell, it doesn't even address the person that's doing the dumbass thing. And so now I know that there's got to be a pressure valve release somewhere in all of us. But seeing this behavior, I know exactly what's going on, but never bring it up, which brings me to my next point. So we're going from the forest to the trees to people don't want to hear the truth. This is the second thing in this list of these three things that they're struggles that only people who are awake will actually take note of and understand. Forest to the trees, and now people don't want to hear the truth. You can't handle the truth, we hear. But people don't want to hear the truth. Most people are completely comfortable with their blinders. Oh, yeah, I'm okay here. Yeah, I can't see what's going on over there, and that's okay, because life for me is what life is for me. And those blinders provide a sense of safety for us, and sometimes security. One of the hardest things people can do is focus their gaze inward. The general consensus seems to be that if you're looking for answers to the way that you are, that something must be wrong with you. Nothing could be further from the truth. That's like saying that you're exploring a coral reef because there's something wrong with it. This is why I say you're not always dredging up negative things or abuses that have happened to you. When you scuba dive, if you've ever scuba dived, I've scuba dived, I've snorkeled, and I've scuba dived the coral reefs in the Honduras off the Bay Islands there, Utila, Roatan, and Wanaha. Gorgeous. And you don't scuba dive a reef to look for its problems. You're usually exploring it for its beauty and to see what you can see and to explore and learn something. Unless, of course, you're a marine, but there's exceptions. You're a marine biologist, you're trying to find out why a reef might be dying. Yeah, there's that too. But that's that negative side of looking for the negative things on the inside. So the human psyche is fascinating. And there's nothing more fulfilling than exploring your own coral reef, your inner coral reef. Again, there's a very strong parallel here to emotional intelligence. There's a difference in knowing what you feel and knowing why you feel it. You may know what you feel, but do you know why you feel that way? Why does reading a poem bring a tear to your eye? Why do you get great happiness out of sitting on a swing with the person that you love out at the park? Why is that there? It's not knowing what you feel, it's knowing why you feel it. And so this is the exploration. So when you have this understanding of the human psyche, even on a basic level, you see those forest and trees connections. And for people who choose not to see those connections, the last thing in the world that they want to do is hear about them, let alone understand them. Take it into, because I experience this a lot, the paranormal realm, ghosts, hauntings, things like that, spirit activity. There's a lot of people that just don't want to know. They experience perhaps some of the visceral externals of that. They see things sometimes, but they don't tell me there's a ghost in my house. I don't want to know it. Now, that might be not a perfect example, but this is what I'm talking about. Perhaps people need to know something is there in order to understand it. People take evaluations of their actions and emotions as criticism. If you tell somebody, hey, I've noticed this thing about you, they'll take it more often than not as criticism, more often than not. And if you say, you do this because you do this, you feel this, people get the notion that you're trying to psychoanalyze them from your armchair. And they don't want to focus that microscope on themselves because they're afraid of what they might find. Tearing your own psyche apart and peeling back the layers of how your mind works and why it isn't a comfortable process. No matter how fulfilling it is in the end result, once you get there and you've worked through it and you've discovered and you've explored and you've found, so then you find yourself understanding the thoughts and actions of the people around you better than they understand themselves. And that's where the hard part comes in. Listen to this. No matter how fulfilling it is in the end, so then you find yourself understanding the thoughts and actions of the other people around you better than they understand themselves. That's when the hard part comes in. The fear of expression and the consequence of that fear. It's like the old illustration I've given of the old Baptist mid-missions missionary back in my seminary days. We're talking 35 years ago. And he gave the example of, and I've told you this one before, the mission medical station out in the bush somewhere in the deepest, darkest Africa. And there was a disease there they were trying to help cure. And amongst the village people, not the band, the villagers. And the witch doctor really did not like this and became very aggressive toward the mission station. And so the doctor invited the witch doctor and his cronies in to the mission station and showed them in the microscope. This disease isn't caused by demons or this or that. It's this viral infection. And he showed them in the microscope. If we can eradicate that virus, that will eradicate this disease amongst your people. And that night, the mission station was broken into, and all the microscopes were taken out into the compound and smashed to bits. And the next day, the doctor confronted the witch doctor, and he said, "Did you smash all the microscopes in my lab?" And the witch doctor just smiled wryly at him and said, "Now there are no more virus." And so, detaching yourself from the truth is what many people live by. They have to put on those blinders in order to exist. And so the fear of expression and the consequence of that fear is the hardest part in the whole process. And this is the third thing about knowing that you're awake and others around you might not be. Knowing that people don't seek the same enlightenment for themselves that you seek in yourself lends to a condition where you want to express yourself about someone's actions. Don't you want to do that? If you've learned a lesson in your life and you go, "Wait, I see exactly what you're doing. Let me tell you what I learned and what I see you doing." People, usually you get the hand. Speak to the hand. You're criticizing me. And sometimes I find that in my own relationship with my wife. We both have done that. It's where, don't criticize me. I don't care if you think you've stumbled upon this, because you know what? You got plenty of wrongs in your own life too, and faults. And nobody wants to be criticized. And so how do you express that? And the problem is that when you express yourself about somebody's actions, you fear the defensive nature that comes along with it. Have you ever tried to tell someone that their behavior is a result of an emotional condition that they don't care to understand? It's like telling an alcoholic that they drink too much. So in an effort to avoid those defensive repercussions, you end up biting your tongue, which only leaves blood in your mouth. And so there are so many situations in everyday life where I see the underlying emotional connections to people's actions and choose not to say anything about them, that the end result is nothing but stress. It's stress for me, which often manifests itself, so the more stressed out I am, the worse I feel. I just want to snap. I want to yell at people. I want to stop projecting their emotional ignorance in the form of finger pointing and deflection and address their own issues. I want them to do that. But I find out sometimes I'm very judgmental and I stand and I put myself on the pedestal and I point it out, mostly because I recognize it in myself. So I end up projecting. But I simply don't do the right thing sometimes. I reflect on how their actions make me feel. And I ruminate on the things I wish I could say. And I'm the one that ends up absorbing it. For instance, have you ever worked around a coworker that treats you like crap because some other aspect of their lives outside of work? You worry that if you point that out, and if you point out that you aren't the real problem, but they are, there could be repercussions from you expressing yourself. So you end up in this terrible work environment, fully aware of why this person treats you the way they do, and knowing it's not your fault, and afraid to do anything about it. And that's the very general example of wakefulness. But the reality of it is universal. The struggle is all too real for us. And so these three things that let you know that you might be truly awake, and you're only going to understand this if you are, is seeing the forest through the trees. It's people knowing that there's people don't want to hear the truth, and there's this fear of expression and the consequence of that fear. So as you peel back the layers of the onion, you find out who you are, and you learn things about yourself that is good for you. But trying to meter that when you have to deal with other people that you know aren't and don't take the time to do that is frustrating. And so that is a problem that we all end up with. And so how do you deal with this? First, let's look at 7 things, if we've got some time. We got about 5 minutes left. So there's 7 things that let you know that you're truly awake. How to open your eyes to the world that you don't see. So, looking inward, draw your attention to an apparently surprising thing. If I told you that now, when you're listening to this, right now, this very moment, you're in fact asleep, would you believe that I've gone a little nuts? No, not if you've listened to the show long enough. You're awake, you're concentrating your attention to listening and to conversing, doing whatever you're doing, and you're aware of your environment as well. You can see the furniture in your room, you can see your computer, you can listen to your radio, you can hear the call of the birds in the nearby forest, if you will, or out in your trees like I did this morning for the first time this season. I heard birds singing this morning. Spring's coming. But you're also aware of your thoughts and your emotions. How can anyone claim that you're asleep at this very moment? Naturally, you, like everyone else, sleeps, well, mostly at night, depending on your schedule. And sometimes you see dreams while you sleep. But right now, it's daytime and you're awake. So how can you see dreams? You imagine a whole world around yourself. This is the first step. I believe that you don't only sleep at night, but also during the daytime. I believe that your present state of consciousness, your greatest illusion, is that you think you're awake. And I believe that in your present existence, your greatest illusion is when you think that you're alert. What I see is that in your present state of consciousness, you're asleep. And at present, you're dreaming. And what you see and hear are all parts of your dream. Your nighttime sleep is only different from your daytime sleep in that in the night, your dreams are less active. During the day, you imagine a whole world around you and you play an active role in that dream. Your personal history takes place in that world of dreaming. The dream life that we've talked about. And identifying with that world shapes your personal identity. So at present, you are dreaming that as a part of your personal history, and you're reading these events that take place in your life as actual fact when they are in fact the dream state that you live in. You have to identify with the role of the spiritual seeker, and you're outraged by what you're actually hearing, listening to, seeing, all of these things. So the questions might arise, why do I claim that you're asleep and dreaming right now, in the now? This doesn't apply to everybody. It applies to a lot of us, though. From the state of consciousness I call alertness. Just another way of saying aware, awake. I can see that you're asleep, and you believe yourself to be a separate self, and you're captive of the works of your mind. You're not present. You're not in the now. So, what's the evidence for me to say that you might now be still asleep and that you're sleeping your way through life? And as a citizen of a dreamland, you're dreaming that you're awake. It's because you're not present. To be present means that you are fully alert, you're attentive, you're conscious in the present moment. Whatever you do that fully consciously. You focus your entire attention on that particular activity. Do you feel free to declare that you're present in every moment of your life, that you're awake, aware, in the now? What does it mean to be awake? It's happened to all of us that we have come under the spell of the moment. At some time during our life, a beautiful landscape, a sunset, a beautiful piece of art, the rhythm of music enchanted us, and it may even be that we're just as lost in the silence of a peaceful moment. And the identification with the forms and the shapes loosen us a bit, for just a little bit. And in that instance, we may experience an entirely different state of consciousness. So how do you tell that you're awake in life? Here are the 7 qualities, and frankly, we got about a minute and a half to do it. I'm going to read them off to you. And they go like this. Here's my list. 1. When our identification with a form ceases, a new space is generated between us and the form. And we're able to recognize that we're not identical to that form. We're separate from it. 2, we virtually step out of the psychological time frame. We stop mulling over injuries of the past, and we don't build our identity on our injuries of the past for our futures. 3, ego disappears. That doesn't mean we don't all have egos. We're all narcissistic to a certain point. We look in the mirror, brush our face, comb our teeth. Stuff like that. We want to look good. We all have egos. And telling personal history stops, and the line of our custom identity is broken. 4, while we're awake, only the present moment exists for us. Our soul is permeated by the quiet of the miracle that is the consciousness and the joy of simply existing. 5, we're free and independent of the forms and shapes and of the necessity of choosing from them. All our suffering and our problems have vanished, and we're surrounded by peace and tranquility. Not that we're walking around, peace and tranquility all the time. We're affected by the things of life, but at the core, this is what we become. 6, there's only pure existence. We are eyewitnesses, contemplating the dance of forms and shapes around us. And we don't identify with anything. We're consciousness free of the obligation to make choices. And 7, we accept life as it is, and it's not done under pressure, since that acceptance is the result of our complete freedom. And you know what? We're out of time. I can't get into digging into these any deeper. Maybe we'll hit this tomorrow if something else doesn't come up in between then and now. And in a state of consciousness, an entirely new dimension of existence opens up for us, showing us existence as a completely new perspective on our lives. And this comes by peeling back the onion layers, looking to the core, seeing what you're made of, and looking to the world around you and not living in the dream state. Boom, I got to stop there, folks. We're done for tonight. Thanks for being here. 23-hour break, and we'll be right back. Sit tight.